Robert Bracken is the senior urban designer at Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. He's the guide behind the vision for Chicago Lakeside, which is a redevelopment of 600-acre site on Chicago's south lakefront. It was one of the site itself was one of the largest steel mills in America, forging the bones for the skyscrapers and the buildings of the Chicago skyline. And now it's the site of a bold vision for the future of a sustainable city. We're really lucky to have Robert with us. And Robert, there he is.
Perfect.
Robert, the podium's yours.
Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here. So that last panel was a really great precursor to what I'm going to talk about today, because what we're doing at Chicago Lakeside really is trying to challenge business as usual when it comes to infrastructure development, landscape, and ecology. So just a little bit before I get into the project itself, this is a project with a big history and hopefully even a bigger future. It's been around for about 10 years. It first came to us through the city of Chicago. Now it's in a joint venture partnership between two developers, US Steel Corporation and McCaffrey Interests, who are our clients. Of course, the city is critical in what we'll be discussing today, because many of the things we're trying to do actually aren't even allowable by current city codes. And so how we work with the city and how we try to move forward and create a sort of vision together for this project is really critical. It's also a very large design team. We are, at Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, the master planners here. This is my team. But we are orchestrating a large group of international and quite local expertise to help bring a lot of insight into how we might move forward with this project. So we have very local people like SpaceCo doing our geotechnical analysis, but we've also reached out to groups like Ramble from Copenhagen to work on district energy and these things that they're experts at, WSP for traffic, and so on and so forth. This is a highly collaborative initiative, and we've been working on it now really in the past 2 years in a new light. So let's not forget where we are. The panel before this eloquently put how important the Great Lakes are to us as a people that share this precious resource. So I don't have to go on to that diatribe like I normally would at this slide, but let's just say we're perched right on Lake Michigan. What an amazing opportunity to demonstrate how we can urbanize differently, how we can actually foster a better urban environment, and how that relates to that watershed that is so precious to all of our lives. So for those who don't know, Chicago downtown is known as the Loop. The site I'm talking about is about 10 miles south. University of Chicago, Hyde Park, that area, for those of you who are familiar, is about equidistant, about 5 miles south, halfway. This region, really from south side of Chicago all the way down through northern Indiana, was the largest steel producing region in the country. It still is a large steel producing region, but a lot of that's begun to dry up, really starting in Illinois. It's being pushed to Indiana, to Gary, and other places. Our site was a former steel mill. It's this shape, which you'll see in a moment, but really it was the engine for this entire neighborhood, the South Chicago neighborhood, which at one point was 40,000 people working in that steel mill. Basically, it was a glorified working housing. It was, today you can actually feel the sort of views to downtown, how actually close you are, even though you are that 10 miles distance. But this is what it used to be. The largest steel mill in the history of the country. A lot of the steel that was made here built the skylines of Chicago, the bridges of the Midwest, helped fuel World War II. The story is incredible. But by the end of the 90s, for a lot of reasons, increasing global pressure and steel market moving elsewhere, they ran out of business there. So it's been vacant, this kind of clean slate, for about 10 years now. This neighborhood that was the working class was utterly disenfranchised when the steel mill closed. And as a matter of fact, it really is a kind of clean slate. If you notice, there is no infrastructure on the site today. When the steel mill was decommissioned, they actually literally bulldozed it into its own foundations. And then on top of that, they didn't remove those foundations. So the subsurface condition is a mess. There's these huge, massive concrete plinths everywhere, but it's a an opportunity to leverage scale, right? This is 600 acres. This is the same size as downtown Chicago Loop. So this is kind of where we're thinking about going with it. A full-time population of roughly 50,000 people, mixed use, vibrant. So hopefully it can be as much of an engine for this community as the steel mill once was, right? We're calling it the lakeside idea. It's a development of global significance, something that we can demonstrate to the world how we can be better stewards of not only the lake, but of all of our infrastructure systems. But also, it's a place where we can think about living differently within our own region. Part of this involves kind of recentering our thinking. We're not just 10 miles south of downtown. We're actually right at the heart of a robust business capital region with a $500 billion GDP and resources that can begin to leverage off the big city amenities and infrastructure that Chicago already has in place, right? Chicago was a transportation hub throughout its history. Started with rails, then highways, now planes, and actually it's moving to fiber optics as well, right? So how can we piggyback off those things that are already there, upgrade, enhance, and move forward? We realize this really has to be all about community. For those who know Chicago's South Side, it's not the easiest place to live in the world. It has its fair share of problems, crime, socioeconomic, deteriorating infrastructure. So really, if we want to talk about attracting a new vibrant sense of place here, a new community, we have to have enhanced employment. We have to have health and wellness. We have to have a mix of housing with amenities. We have to provide a really fabulous public realm where people will actually want to be. So why can we think this way? Again, there's nothing on the site. We're going to have to build infrastructure anyways, right? So the decision is made. Do you just do business as usual? Do you extend the typical city of Chicago streets? Do you bring this typical combined sewers, the typical coal-driven power, right? Do we just go ahead and do that, or do we think about it differently? Can we do a new approach to infrastructure? And can this infrastructure be a catalyst for new types of development? So we're organizing the idea around 5 principles. I'm going to kind of march through these with a little bit of a deeper dive on the 4th one there, that next generation infrastructure. But really, it has to be designed for living differently. We have to create this vibrant sense of place on the southeast lakefront of Chicago, which is currently lacking. We need to understand what this means for the communities, not just necessarily immediately adjacent, but within the Chicago city. Of course, this infrastructure is important. I'll talk about it. And how do we start? How do we actually begin? How do we begin to think about investing in this? So design for living differently, we need a place that's live, work, play, connected to the lakefront, right? We need a car-optional, transit-friendly, walkable to all open spaces sort of environment that will address a lot of the things that are lacking currently in this part of the city today. As a matter of fact, one of the first things the client did when they began to think about developing this parcel was they gave back 120 acres of lakefront property. If you know Chicago, there's not a lot of that available anymore. This achieved really 2 things that are quite special. First, it reconnected this community with its lakefront. When the steel mill was in place for over a century, if you lived right here, you were never able to even see the water or walk there. It was cut off. So that's great. On top of that, if you know Chicago, we have Daniel Burnham, the great Burnham Plan, which we hold really close to our hearts to this day. One of the key components outside the great park and boulevard system was this continually accessible public lakefront, right? And this was a gap. This was a 2-mile gap where if you were taking the bike trail down, you had to kind of get off and find your way through the community and then get back on, right? So all that's been given back right away as a platform. Connecting these people with their lakefront, fostering a healthier way of life, and really creating a 20-year vision for a new southern anchor on this lakefront, right? And not just for people, but for wildlife and for a variety of user groups that can begin to enjoy this new thing. One of the ways we've had to do this, actually, because the steel mill property wasn't conducive to growing things very well. As I'll show you in a moment, it was actually built through a byproduct process called slag. But we actually had to import mud to get the parks going. Most of you who are city planners know that most major metropolitan areas that have dredging for navigable waterways deposit that sludge somewhere. They dump it, they find a place to put it. We were able to capture that dredging from Lake Peoria nearby and actually bring that mud straight to our site. It's called mud. We're calling it the Mud to Parks program. This has been going on for a while. But what it's allowed us to do is go from this sort of barren surface condition, which was left by the steel mill being decommissioned, and actually build parks and begin to actually put landscape in place that can support trees. I love this view. You see what was the U.S. steel mill plant, which we've greened up, but this is a currently existing steel mill, actually, Gary Works, northern Indiana, just to see the potential to change. Rooted in the wider community is critical. I give this presentation quite a bit, and usually one of the first things I get asked is this just like this massive gentrification project happening on the south side? It's really not funny, but are you displacing the existing community that's there? Absolutely not. This is a 50-year vision in an aggressive sense. We're talking about 50 million square feet over 50 years, and that's optimistic at best. So it's critical to understand what's really clear is that, as a matter of fact, when this thing begins to get going, even if it's bits and pieces, the first people that are going to get these benefits and the first market opportunities is the existing community that's in place. So if we put retail in to address food deserts, or we can put things in here and actually begin to build synergy with these things. And furthermore, the project itself, Lakeside, and the infrastructure that we're deploying there, which I'll get into in a moment, has the ability to become a catalyst for change throughout the entire south side, right? We can actually push out those benefits and those systems along the grid and enable the adjacent community to be give as much potential as Lakeside does itself. This will attract industries, this will create 21st century jobs, and this will educate the labor force. But another key part is connectivity, transit, right? So if we can address the communities adjacent, but we also have to be able to get there from major hubs and transit centers, right? We've had a few ideas on how to help create connectivity, because some people feel maybe 10 minutes is too far or 10 miles is too far from downtown for this to really be viable. So there's a lot of things we can think about, but currently we're thinking about a few solutions. One is taking advantage of underutilized freight rail corridors. This is an idea that's been done in other cities. Atlanta's doing it currently. It's not a reinvestment in a huge infrastructural solution. It's taking the existing infrastructure, the rails themselves, and just changing the rolling stock. It's an upgrade. It's not cheap, but it's not nearly as expensive as building a new light rail system, right? And Chicago, being the former industrial capital and logistical hub that it is, has all these rail corridors we can use to think about converting from freight to passenger, linking to both current and potential future hubs. Similarly, we have something in Chicago called the Metra. It's kind of like a commuter rail. It connects suburbs to city center. There's a unique Metra line, though, that runs along the southeast lakefront of Chicago called the Metra Electric South Branch. It's paid for, it operates as a Metra, as a commuter rail, but really we know it wants to be like a CTA line, like a subway line, as we call them in Chicago. It has stops every half mile. It operates entirely within the city limits. Again, we can just change the rolling stock, not the rails themselves, and go from what is a every 45-minute sort of commuter rail typical solution and rethink it as a new line that connects not only Millennium Park and downtown to Lakeside, but actually enables sort of connectivity for all these assets that string along the southeast lakefront of Chicago that it's so famous for. Soldier Field, McCormick Center, Rainbow Beach, 35th Street Harbor, University of Chicago, Jackson Park, Hyde Park. If you've been to Chicago, you know it has this amazing lakefront. And the fact that there's not this transit line actually serving that and enabling that to grow even more seems quite silly. Of course, we can also think about water transit and other opportunities. And then right in our backyard, we can think about BRT corridors and some of these technologies that are flexible enough to embrace this change over time. We're not trying to invest in a new subway system. We're not trying to, go for perhaps something that would be too cost prohibitive. So the infrastructure. What am I talking about? I keep talking about infrastructure. I'm talking about a new approach to energy, water, waste, and ICT, and how these infrastructure solutions that we're thinking about can become this catalyst for a new way of developing, a new way of living. Energy, we're talking about district energy. The gentleman from Sweden is way ahead of us, as are our friends in Copenhagen we're working with. District energy is actually being done in the United States all over. It's being done on a lot of college campuses. The idea is that you're leveraging scale, right? You have enough demand outright because we're building at this large scale, but you can actually rethink energy solutions from this with the enabling of the scale. The water, as I'll get into, But restoring balance with the lake is critical in Chicago. Waste, we're talking about massive reduction, but also potentially waste to energy and some of these things that was mentioned in the earlier panel. And ICT, we'll get into working with Cisco Systems on what that platform really needs to be for this site. So energy, I'm not talking about just electricity. Again, I think this is clear from the last panel. We're talking about combined heat and power. We're talking about all the thermal flows that matter for a city, right? Currently, Chicago produces 73% of its electricity from coal and another 22% from nuclear. We can do much better. But also, we're pretty convinced that we can use the Chicago grid strictly as a backup, that we have enough opportunity on our site through a variety of technologies, whether that be waste to energy, combined heat and power, natural gas turbines, renewables, and subsidize those with the passive opportunities that the site provides itself. Deep lake water cooling is something we're very fond of, which we know you're doing here in Toronto, and we're very jealous. That's something we would absolutely like to do here, ground source cooling, other opportunities where you're leveraging the geothermal condition of the site and the quite special nature of it. We can rethink all of our electricity and energy demands and how those relate not only to the buildings and the development and the infrastructure itself, but also to Lake Michigan. So waste is another kind of sensitive subject in Chicago. We're sending a large portion of our waste to landfills, most of it. And there's, again, ways to do much better, which I think most of the people in this room are aware of, but we can not only reduce and reuse and recycle, but we can talk about energy recovery through refuse-derived fuel sources or biogasification, all these kind of things that I think have been mentioned in some of these earlier panels, but a way of not just optimizing the flow and reducing the amount of trash, but producing revenue streams from it, producing value. And this is critical because as we talk about investing in these systems in a little bit, we're going from dumb infrastructure to smart infrastructure, right? We're going from infrastructure that just costs money to own and operate to infrastructure that produces revenue, that you can sell this biogas, you can sell this gray water for your irrigation needs, and you can sell these things to customers nearby. Water is the most sensitive subject in Chicago. I get criticized for being negative on Chicago. I'm not. I love Chicago, and they're making a lot of great strides, but we do send over 2 billion gallons a day down to the Gulf Coast, through New Orleans, where I come from. We reversed our river at the turn of the century. It was this great story of modern engineering. But now it's become a little bit of a problem. And these 2 billion gallons need to go back to the Great Lakes watershed, which is indeed not as renewable as everyone thinks. So we have an opportunity on Lakeside that's very special. This is how the site was built. It's called slag. It's a byproduct of the steelmaking process. When they bring the rock in, they remove the ore, they get this kind of gravel-like byproduct. And they just dumped it. They literally encroached out and built the site out over time in these kind of layers right into Lake Michigan. This was interesting. There were some pros and cons. One pro was actually because of this soil condition, this is the only spot in Chicago where water still goes back into Lake Michigan. The con was because this is the only spot where water goes into Lake Michigan, it leached out all those contaminants that were left by the steel mill over time, and that all went back into the watershed. That was good for the developer. There wasn't a lot of remediation that needs to be done, but bad for the planet. Not just our stormwater, though, our wastewater too, right? We can rethink this bottom right photo we like. It's a wastewater treatment plant in Victoria, British Columbia. They don't have to be these large swath things you see when you're flying in the airplane, right? Those big things of standing water you see in cities. Again, they can optimize at this district scale, we feel. Technologies like membrane bioreactors, like living machines. Again, it's that district scale sweet spot where you have enough demand, you have enough wastewater flow to legitimize the deployment of it. We're doing the calculations as we speak, but we're very confident actually that we can be water positive in Lakeside, i.e. we can harvest enough water from the sky and we can pull out responsibly and return more water to Lake Michigan purified than we took out. Excuse me. And so we're thinking about water in a variety of different categories. We're talking about water that hits roofs. We're talking about water that hits streets, first flushes, right? Water that hits parks, and a variety of solutions on how to deal with this. This gets a lot with what I heard a little bit earlier today. You know, there's simple things like bioswales that, why am I pointing to that? Bioswales that, can move water in overland flow through phytoremediation, purify it, and drop it in the lake. But we also have the opportunity for infiltration, retention, recharging the aquifer in place, cisterns and green roofs, moving water, managing water in a much more holistic and hybridized way. This is what they look like if you're interested in an architectural drawing. ICT, I'm running out of time, we got kind of lucky on this one. We're working with Cisco Systems. It turns out this red line you see here that's so heavy is one of the major long-haul fiber optic broadband connectors really for the world. It connects New York, Chicago to LA, and then beyond to Western Europe and East Asia. It goes right by our site, right? It's pretty close. We're able to plug into this, actually. And that's pretty cool because not only can we enable this community to have really powerful wireless, but actually this becomes the backbone for a much larger ICT platform that we can monitor. This is what we're getting again in the last panel, the idea that we need to actually prove that we're delivering, right? We need to prove that we're creating water savings. We need to prove that we're delivering the energy as cleanly and as efficiently as we say we are. And you do this through smart metering. You do this through the blinking lights that you see everywhere, right? And that's the level of ICT that ICT can kind of give and actually show that these things are actually working. Furthermore, it allows all these sort of flexible virtualization things that are enabling communities to do great things. Simply put, I think this has been clear in these conferences, so I'm preaching to the choir, but a robust ICT platform does far more than simply give people gigabit connectivity. It's allowing them to be more entrepreneurial. It's allowing them to leverage knowledge and information in a much more efficient way. So we feel it's important that all of this infrastructure be deployed in something we're calling a neighborhood utility, an integrated delivery of these systems, a coherent package, right? So this is the entity which will guide the investment, management, and operations. And this is ownership neutral. I'm not saying this is a public thing, a private thing yet. We're at the point where we're still trying to just demonstrate the value, that these systems make sense. What it'll mean also is that because this is consolidated, if you live at Lakeside, you get one bill. You get your energy, your water, your waste, and your ICT all through one bill. It's like the bundling to the max, right? Furthermore, this allows for this increased efficiency in deployment and operation and maintenance. You know, I can't tell you how many cities I go to, and it's the same story where the water guys come through and they rip up the road, and then the road guys come through and they fix it. 3 days later, the electricity guys come on, rip up the same piece of road, and these guys fix it, right? What's going on? We need to be much more consolidated and coherent in the deployment of these kinds of things. And furthermore, this also allows us to maintain that aspirational standard, right? So whether it's a holding company or a private-public venture, I don't want to get into that today, but it is important that it makes sense financially, right, for someone, whoever the stakeholders are. And so what we're talking about is building the market as we build the infrastructure at Lakeside. Again, we have the scale, we have the potential demand to legitimize this infrastructure. So Chicago Lakeside Development has a program and it has loads, right? Great. Neighborhood utility, those are customers, right? So they have to pay their bills. And furthermore, it's all about supply and demand, right? Then we have the CapEx and OpEx for the generation and distribution of those services. That's how they're going to set their rates, and that's going to come through their utility bill, right? But how that actually works over time and how you actually address that demand curve, that's the tricky part, right? Because infrastructure is really expensive. So just for instance, I think this was electricity, but if the blue is your demand over time, right? This is how much power you're going to need based on your forecasting for population. Infrastructure comes in stair steps, right? You build a power plant or you build a membrane bioreactor, and it has a certain capacity. So the sweet spot, what is the right level of investment to address that demand curve and get those paybacks that you need? That's the tricky thing. That's what we're trying to figure out. But we're confident that it makes sense. As a matter of fact, these systems, as you know, have been done all over the world. As I mentioned, there's district energy all over, there's wastewater treatment decentralized all over. All these things are happening, and people realize there's a market opportunity there. They're just not consolidating and leveraging them together, and that's what makes Lakeside quite special, in my opinion. So I'll just finish quickly. I know I'm way over, but Lakeside Innovation Center, this is great. When you start talking about things like this living laboratory, the ability to actually kind of bring other people to the party. So we're working with a lot of great partnerships. It's really exciting. We talk about how do you build a new city, and everyone wants to be involved. So we have corporate partners and we have institutional partners like University of Chicago and Argonne National Laboratories who are giving us some additional computing power to do some of these things we need to do. But it's really just exciting to see how everyone wants to be a part of this co-location of closing the gap between research and development, deployment, commercialization, and evaluating how great that's really performing, and then closing that feedback loop. Finally, a powerful beginning. I'm almost over, I promise. This is our mayor, Rahm Emanuel. He's kind of famous for saying, we're trying to build a 21st century city on 19th century infrastructure, right? We really feel this is an opportunity to leapfrog, an opportunity to not just extend, again, the same typical combined sewers, the same typical streets into our project, but to do something quite different and to show the world that it actually makes sense. a powerful beginning. Just finally, we're beginning to get projects online, and again, this goes back to that idea we're creating the market. So what we have here is the beginning of the city, right, or the district. Housing, retail, ICT center, which includes a data center, which is a big energy hog, which is increasing that demand to legitimize the deployment of these things. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is that these blue bubbles, whatever they end up being, have to create enough demand, enough load to legitimize the orange hot dogs or the infrastructure that would need to serve them, right? And that's really what we're trying to prove here. So just to close on some views, this was the slip. This is where the boats used to come in and deliver the ore or the rock before it would be processed. This is how we kind of imagine it coming into fruition. And finally, looking back. That is it. Thank you.